Good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar on moving to France. My name is Liz Rowlinson, overseas property journalist of 20 years. I've been with Place in the Sun for 9 years and frequently travel to France for skiing, beaches, all the wonderful things, food and drink that it offers. We're here to talk about today, moving to France full time. The transition clock is ticking down and we're being bombarded with questions about how to do it in time, what are the steps, what do we know at this point. So I've got two experts here to help answer your many questions, and I'd like to get them to introduce themselves. Joanna Leggett.
Hi, I'm Joanna Leggett. I'm one of the owners at Leggett Immobilier in France. We're a British-owned agency, one of the biggest independent. We cover all areas of France. We've got about 600 agents across different regions. So we're here to help. We all live and work in France, and we've been established 20 years, a bit like your establishment as well, Liz.
Thanks, Joe. And I think, Rob, you've been in the south of France for 30 odd years, is that right?
Not exactly, Liz. As everyone can see on the screen, my name is Rob Kay. I apologise for the echo, if anyone's picking that up. Now, I've actually been in France for the last 23 years. Levins Franks have been here for about 35 with the permanent offices around France, and Levins Franks as a firm has been around for 45 years. What Levins Franks are all about is we assist people to move to France and to rearrange their affairs, to make sure that all their affairs are correctly established and arranged for life in France. And then we continue to look after clients beyond that, because things are changing, because the majority of our clients still have assets back in the UK. So primarily we deal with British expatriates who've moved to France, and our other offices in Spain and Portugal do exactly the same thing.
And Rob, why did you go to France originally 23 years ago?
That's a very long story, probably too long for this broadcast. Actually, I was working abroad and I was dealing with lots of French people. Before that, I was working for a French company in the UK, where the head office was in France. And when my previous position was made redundant, I was offered a very nice contract to come and work for Levins Franks. And when they mentioned it was going to be in the south of France, it was a really tough decision to make.
Cool. Well, actually, we're going to kick off with a poll asking our listeners why they are most keen to move to France. What is the main reason you hope to go? Is it A, because you prefer the French lifestyle over the British, B, retirement, C, property is much more affordable in France, and D, better opportunities to run a tourism or lifestyle related business? And we're just going to wait for the results. In the meantime, if you're going to have any questions, click on the right hand panel, the question mark logo, and as we go through, we will try and answer as many questions as possible. Right, we've got the answers. 45% because we love the French lifestyle. We can't argue with that. 23% retirement, 19% affordable property, 13% better opportunities to run a business. So would you kind of find, Joe, what do you think about those results? Do they tally with your buyers?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, 30% of our clients are retirees or coming to retire, but the biggest reason that we see most clients coming for is the French lifestyle. It's a different pace of life, it's a different way of life, it's a lot more community based. France is huge and you get a lot more space, you get a lot more value for money. And I just think it is like England used to be going back 50 years ago, and the kids still go out on their bike and come back when they're hungry. So it is a really, really lovely way of life. And I think it is lifestyle that draws people to France like myself, really.
I think that lifestyle is beginning to come slightly back to normal, isn't it, after COVID? Because a friend of mine in the south of France sent a picture of him having a lovely piece of lamb looking over the Med. The waitress had a face mask on, but apart from that, it felt a bit normal. Is that how it feels for you at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the Dordogne, so we're quite rural and it's rural countryside, but the restaurants and the bars have opened up again now. As you say, all the servers are wearing masks. And you do notice it when we go shopping to the supermarkets or garden centres, because you're not actually allowed in without a mask. So they're quite strict here, which is really good. But, you know, the good thing about that is we haven't seen any cases locally at all. So nobody's really had it around here. So it does feel, you know, quite good. And obviously viewings, we're back on viewings again now, mainly with the French, apart from the Brits that sort of came here before lockdown.
Great. And how about Rob, for you? Are you seeing business pick up again? I gather the French market it has picked up quite quickly.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, we didn't see a slowdown. There was obviously less people coming over because literally they couldn't travel. But I have to say that we certainly didn't have any time off during the lockdown. Luckily, I live 7 minutes walk away from this particular office, so I actually didn't miss a day. And probably my days were longer than they were before, and they've been since, because it would appear that nobody had anything else to do apart from get on their computers and do emails and make phone calls for 12 weeks. So I'm actually quite looking forward to the end of lockdown so I can take a rest.
I think we all are, for different reasons. And Joe, you've been having a record level of inquiries because everyone is sitting there kind of trying to do what they can to speed their property hunt along.
Yeah, it's been it has been completely mad. I mean, we expected it, you know, as Rob said, to slow down, but it actually has been massively busy because people are at home. So they are, you know, most property searches are made online in the first place anyway. We've been doing a huge amount of virtual viewings online, whereby, you know, with new innovative software, you can actually have a live chat at the property, but you're not actually there. We've been doing huge amounts of that. And the French market, the domestic market, has gone completely mad. You know, particularly for countryside properties, we've noticed a huge increase in that, and a huge increase in the amount of sales that have been coming through in the last 2 months, especially since lockdown for the domestic market ended.
And sure, and of course, of the 29th of June, we hope to find out if we can travel to France, and that will be a massive difference. But can you explain why is October the 1st and also July the 1st? Why are they key dates for people looking to live in France?
Well, it depends. I mean, if you're coming to live in France as a resident, then obviously for us that already live here as British people, around July, between July the 1st and the 3rd is when the government launch their websites and tell us what we need to do, whether we need to apply for a carte séjour, what documentation we need, what sort of money we need to be showing that we earn, exactly, you know, those type of things. And that is supposedly going to be launched around the 1st to the 3rd. However, because we've been in lockdown and the functionaries, the civil servants haven't been at work, that might get put back a little bit. October the 1st, because when you buy a property in France, it usually takes 3 to 4 months to go through. So if you want to be here in your property before December the 31st, then you really need to be sort of coming out as soon as you can and getting your offers in and accepted before the end of September, October, because after that, it's sort of touch and go whether it will have enough time to complete before December the 31st.
I see. So yeah, so that slightly answers a question. We've had a question from a listener. You know, we're in the process of buying. How quickly do we need to start completing our pre-Brexit paperwork, and what paperwork is required, Rob? I
mean, as Joanne just said, there's nothing you can do at the moment. From March, the French authorities they just stopped the website, so you couldn't make any applications. And there was quite a lot of people who were getting frustrated because they couldn't get any response anyway, because there's a lot of people who jam the system on. And that's one of the concerns about the system coming back online on around the 4th of July. And that is one reason why the French extended the period when you can apply online for this new card, whatever it's going to be called. They haven't really come up with a fixed name for it yet. Until the end of June next year. Now, that's not something that we would advise anyone to do. You know, I think that personally, I would say that having arrived when you needed a carte de séjour previously, and having sat in the Nice prefecture for a whole day and then get sent away and then have to come back the following day. If you can find an easy way to get through that particular part of the bureaucracy, it would be a godsend. But I think that, you know, what you need to do is if you are here before the end of the year, that is crucial. That's the message that we're sending out. And I'm sure Joanna and her firm are doing the same thing. To get across the line before, it's going to be so much easier. After that, you become the same in theory as any other non-EU EEA national who wants to move to France.
And Rob, on that subject, I know you deal with a lot of international clients, and last time we did a French seminar, we had a few American, especially inquiries. If you are from outside the EU, what is the process for getting residency at the moment?
You mean like British people will be in 8 months' time, 9 months' time? Yeah. I mean, the first thing is that you can't stay in France for more than 3 months. And if you then want to stay for more than 3 months, you actually got to go back to your country of origin. And actually, you've got to apply at the embassy there for a visa. Then once you're issued with the visa, then you can actually make the application. The actual visa is known as a D visa. And that, as I said, you've got to get that from the embassy in the country where you are resident. You then apply for the card de séjour or the residence card or whatever it is. And then you have a whole host of things that you have to prepare and submit with it, which includes birth certificates, marriage certificates, divorce certificates. As Joanna said before, you know, we're expecting that to be able to, you're going to have to prove that you can afford to live in France. And all these things need to be taken into account before you can actually be here for more than 90 days.
Okay, yeah. And we've had a lot of, with that in mind, and the fact, as you're saying, people might not be able to get out until later in the summer, the autumn. They might not be able to complete their purchase in time. A lot of people are suggesting they might rent instead in France while they, so that they can have an address. How does that work? Are you getting a lot of people, Joe, sort of saying that they might do that while they look for a house later in the year?
Well, there are quite a lot of Brits that have already come and done that because they knew what was going to happen and they knew we were going to be in lockdown and they might not be able to travel. Because we've got a lot of British viewings of people that are actually here at the moment and they are renting. There is difficulty with rental contracts though, because the French tend to do them for 1 year or 3 years. So it's quite a long period, but yeah, you would obviously become a resident. You can claim for everything if you have a legal contract, not, you know, you're staying in a gîte, you know, a holiday home gîte for a few months. You would actually need a contract to say that you are legally living here and then go through all the normal formats to become a resident, which yes, if you can do before December, it will just save a lot of paperwork later on. I'm not saying it's going to be difficult, you know, it will be harder obviously, but we sell a lot to Americans and Australians, which are some of the highest international buyers, you know, second to the Europeans, and they live and work here. So, you know, there are ways around it. It's just going to be a little bit more complicated, I think, after Brexit.
Okay, and so I've also had a lot of inquiries from people who own holiday homes in France but want to make the permanent move, and they might not be quite ready to do that yet because they're selling their UK principal home or they're not quite retired. How does that, they'd still need to, even though they've got a property already in France, they'd still need to prove they're resident, wouldn't they, Rob?
Well, it won't be their primary residence if it's a holiday home. Their fiscal tax residence will then be in the UK. So they are still classed as a holiday home owner, not an actual residence of France. So they would have to switch houses to become the resident, and they'd have to be in France. Rob will probably say, I think it's 183 days to be able to say that that is your main residence and not your residence in the UK.
Yeah, Rob, that's a good point at which to explain the difference between residency and tax residency. Can you just flag up that?
Yeah, I mean, it is quite an unusual concept, but I mean, especially at the moment after Brexit, it's going to be much more difficult for a British national to be living in France and not be a tax resident in France. But at the moment, with the fluctuation across borders, you can actually be resident in France, but not necessarily tax resident. You know, France is where you live, but you maybe that you are paying your taxes, let's say in the UK. You know, somebody who is living in France and commutes back to the UK, if they've got a salaried position in the UK and they're paying UK national insurance on that employed income, actually their taxing position stays in the UK. Now that doesn't mean to say they don't have to submit a tax return in France. So they, you know, it's just one instance where a tax residence can be different from actually your residence. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't fall into one of two camps. I mean, you know, going back to what Joanna said a few minutes ago, one of the things that we've done for many years is we've recommended that people who are wanting to move to France, if they're unsure of where they want to live, and there's lots of people who've got holiday homes who we've got experience of, where when they actually then move to France, because they've only spent time in those holiday homes during the holiday season, when they're there full time, actually they then realise that actually that's not the right place to be. Now, you know, I was talking to a couple only this morning who've done exactly that situation. They decided they stayed here during lockdown because they decided they were going to do lockdown here rather than the UK. During that period, they then decided that actually they didn't, they wanted to stay in France. They didn't want to go back to the UK, so they're going to arrive. But actually, the place where they are living is not actually where they would like to be permanently. And because of the costs of buying and selling in France, actually making that decision to buy at the right place is very important. So it's always been a good strategy, you know, to rent somewhere, get a feel for the environment. And this particular couple are actually going back to the UK as soon as lockdown is lifted, or as soon as they can fly in and out and not get quarantined in either country, to close up their affairs in the UK. And they've actually been to the mairie in their local village, and they've been issued with a form which says they are resident. So therefore, when they go to the UK, they're able to come back. Yeah, so there are always steps. And I've always found that our local tax offices and the local mayors are really very obliging. You know, there are these sort of places where everyone goes, oh my word, I can't go there. You know, it's really scary. But really, honestly, in most places, they're really, really helpful.
That's really good advice. I think, yeah, renting and getting a feel for a place is very useful. And I think, Joe, I remember some stats at one point that a lot of your buyers are British people with houses already in France that are perhaps upsizing or making that transition.
Yeah, a lot of people sort of bought a holiday home and then exactly what Rob's just said, moved into their holiday home and then found it wasn't the right area for them. I think if you're buying a permanent residence, you know, you really do need to go and spend some time in the areas of, you know, make a short list of the areas you want to be. The problem we do see though is once you rent somewhere in an area, you get to know everyone, you get to know the people, you end up buying in that area anyway. So you're not actually getting to travel outside of that area to other areas if you're renting in one place. So the more traveling and sort of narrow down the filter before you go out there would be better. And then, yeah, as you say, you know, all areas have got something to offer. I would always suggest that because France is huge and a lot of areas are very rural. A lot of Brits want the countryside properties or, you know, by the coast, but I would definitely try and visit in the winter months because then you'll see is the village still alive, is it still open during the winter. Some places are very, very touristy and, you know, in the winter everything's closed. So it's always good to have a local community nearby. And I also say if you are going to go rural, try and draw, you know, choose your city. So for me, it's Angoulême. I'm 30 minutes from Angoulême, but I'm in the middle of nowhere, but I've still got city life if I need city life. So you get the best of both worlds. And I think that's quite important because a lot of the clients that we see reselling is because they found it too isolated. You know, they bought a property with loads of land, they thought that's what they wanted, but actually they want to integrate and they want to mix with the community and they've been too far away from a city or a town or a village. But a lot of people in France British people in France are moving around. Some just want to be closer to the UK. We get a lot of people from, say, the Languedoc-Roussillon that might move up. Some want to move further south because they want the hotter weather. And there is a lot of Brits that do move around France, which is good. The same as we would do in the UK.
Mm-hmm. And Rob, you're on a Côte d'Azur, which is very exclusive mostly. I mean, it's got everything that you need to live there full time, hasn't it? And that's one of the reasons it's so popular. Are there any parts of it that you'd really like to sort of recommend are great for people to look at? It maybe if they haven't got a budget of, a huge budget of €1 million or something. What, are there nice bits that are more affordable?
It's like every area, to be honest with you. Is that, the advantage of the Côte d'Azur is that excuse the expression, but it's quite squashed. It's squashed between the Var, which is quite a big open space, and Italy. And we have a mountain range that's not far above us. So actually it's squashed from the sea on one side, the mountains above, and it's squashed with Italy and the Var. So it is quite a restricted area. And you've got some towns there that get all the glamour and the glitz. You've got Cannes and Nice and Monaco. And these people, these towns attract people. So you get a lot of people living around there. But it's like anywhere. There are places where you wouldn't necessarily go. I mean, the Nice authorities are probably now going to throw their arms up in the air when I say this, but it's not too long ago that my boys were playing football and travelling to football games in the backside of Nice in places that I don't think any Brit would want to live, never mind any French person or anyone else. So there are always different places, and it's difficult to pinpoint, certain towns that have more affordable housing, for want of a better way of describing it, because most towns and villages do. Certainly where we are, because of the restricted space, if you want a big property with a big garden, it would be maybe more affordable for you, and you'd probably get a lot more bang for your buck somewhere like the Dordogne or the Charente or somewhere like that. If you want to be close to the coast and you want to be near to the idea of 30 kilometres from the nearest town drives fear into my heart. 5 kilometres is too far for me. And you cut your cloth accordingly, don't you?
Yeah, I think you've highlighted a brilliant point of you can look at properties on websites and you might think, oh, like Nice is on the up, fabulous city, but then you need to know the localities. So that's a reason why you should have a good agent and get out there when you can and explore. Joanna, I've got a question for you that's come in from Gillian Curtin. Do you think property prices will drop due to COVID? Now, that's a big, wide question, I know. Another.
Well, I absolutely don't think they will at all. I mean, France over the last couple of years, the amount of sales has gone up and up and up. We're over 1 million last year in 2019. And from what we're seeing at the moment, the French market has gone absolutely bonkers. There are people buying constantly all the time. As I said, we've been established 21 years. We had our biggest week ever in the whole of the 21 years last week with the French. So they do seem to be moving. I think their lifestyle choices might have changed from being in lockdown, and they might think, right, we were thinking of moving. They've had the time whilst they've been at home to search online, to research, etc. But at the moment, it's a really, really strong domestic market, and we're seeing properties that would normally take 6 months to a year to sell, selling on first or second viewings. So I think particularly in the countryside, or places with gardens and open spaces, you might have 1 or 2 buyers on the same property, which we haven't seen in a very long time. So I don't think there's any chance of the property prices dropping at the moment when there's so much demand.
Okay. Another question from Justine. For Justine Gillen. Going back to residency and what you know at the moment, how much income do you need to live in France, Rob?
I'm not sure what the precise figure is. It's around €10,000, isn't it, per person?
Yeah, I think they said we've been investigating that quite a bit, or trying to get information from the government. But they said it would be the minimum wage, which is about 1,186 as for a couple, or 564 for a single person with no children a month. That's the sort of figures that they're talking to us at the moment, because they can't ask a British person to have more than a minimum wage French person earns.
Yes.
And it used to be around 10,000, but it's probably looking more likely to be 15,000 now.
Okay, great. I'll pin you another question. Paul McGarty says, we plan to move to France next year and live off savings, not working. Are there any taxes we need to be aware of, Rob? I'm sure there are.
Where would you like me to start with that one? So I'm now going to take up the rest of this webinar. I mean, really, as I said before, that's where bloody strength of raison d'etre comes into it. I mean, you can arrive in France and you can have, at this moment in time, all the same investments that you've got in the UK. The difficulty is we don't know how they're going to be taxed come next year. And some of them are tax exempt at the moment. So depending on how the listener has their financial affairs arranged. Give you an example. Let's say that they have investment assets that are sitting in UK ISAs. They're tax exempt savings vehicles in the UK, but they don't have any tax advantages in France. So they will literally get taxed on whatever they take from them, on whatever the investments make. Now, one of the big things that we're doing at the moment is people who've built up, there's quite a lot of people who've built up investment assets, not necessarily in pensions, but they've just accumulated monies while they've been working, and that's what's going to give them their retirement income. Now, in the UK, what you would do is you would use all the allowances and all the tax exempt savings schemes to structure those investments. The problem is in France that they don't really work. You've got to really have a French-centric portfolio. Now, that doesn't mean to say that the inner workings of it are any different. It's just the structuring of it. So if you structure it correctly, you can minimize the tax. There's lots of very interesting tax exempt savings vehicles in France, and you can really then start to play around with the tax, because there's a major difference between the UK tax system and the French system. So you've got me on my pet subject now, Liz, because in the UK tax is independent. So if one person in the household has got a big income, actually in the UK they could be paying higher rates of tax, whereas they simply move to France, and that's because of the FOIA system and the household system. Their income is then divided between everyone in the household, so actually the tax rates can come down.
Okay.
And from that point of view, we can make France a lot more tax efficient.
So speak to an expert such as yourself about all these things is the advice there. Going back maybe 3 steps, Joe, a question from Mark Harvey. Is it easy to open a bank account in France?
Yes, we open bank accounts for our clients all the time. It is as long as you've got an address. And I would always recommend going local to all of the services that you have, whether it's house insurance, or which the bank can do as well, is to go to the local bank where the house is going to be situated. Again, it's a little bit like going back in time in the countryside, rural locations, probably not in the cities like Nice, etc. But we all know our bank managers. We can go in and have a chat at any time. Generally speaking, well, how it used to work when I was selling was just you would just literally set up an appointment. You would go in with the company devant, the 10 days were up, it was all signed, so they'd have an address, and you could do it at that stage. Or you have to have some sort of contract to show that you actually live in France to be able to open the account. But I don't think you can do it without a French address. I'm not sure, maybe Rob knows more on that, but as far as I know, you can't do it without a French address. It
will be very difficult.
Okay. Because the banks are quite regional, aren't they? I think you've said that in the past, Joe. It's not quite the same setup as in the UK.
Well, I can speak for the countryside, because obviously that's where I've been living. But for example, my bank is Crédit Agricole, and they are all over the country. But they have local branches that you actually go in and you can do business. We still have checkbooks here, and you can still go to the supermarket and pay with a check. So it is quite different. But it was, from all the clients that I've opened accounts for, it was a very simple process. They needed probably 50 euros, proof of address, proof of UK address if it was holiday home, and then it was quite a simple way to set up, because you do have to have an account in France because of all the electrics, water bills and things like that you need to set up on direct debit, particularly if you're not there. So as soon as you find the property and you've signed a compromise, that would be the time, because then you know what area you're going to be in, and then you go to the bank with your agent or by yourselves and you can set up a bank account. A lot of the French banks now have English speakers as well, that they've employed specifically because of the amount of Brits that don't speak French, and particularly holiday homeowners. You can't expect a holiday homeowner to speak fluent French if they're only going to be there for certain months of the year. But it is quite simple to do.
Okay. Moving on to mortgages, Rob. We had a question. I've read that you should take out a mortgage whether you need it or not in France. This is apparently to avoid death duties. Can you give me a simple, relatively short answer to that?
The short answer is no. No, in theory, you could avoid French succession tax if you took a mortgage out and you were a non-resident. Because in theory, then what you're doing is, when you die, it's your French assets that will be liable to succession tax. So therefore, it's the net value. So if you, let us say, for instance, that you were buying a property, I'm just using, you mentioned the figure before, let's say you were going to buy a property for €1 million and you decided that you're going to borrow 500,000. If you were a British resident, the 500,000 would stay in the UK. You'd put 500,000 in and then you'd borrow another 500,000. So when you die, the succession tax would only be on 500,000, not on $1 million. So I can see it from that point of view. I get the theory behind it. Whether it's a long-term strategy is another matter, because depending on the value of the property, you could end up over the whole period of the duration of the mortgage ending up paying more interest to the bank than you would do to the taxman. It's a little bit like a few years ago when lots of people took out mortgages to reduce their wealth tax debt.
Yeah.
And you know, the amount of conversations I had with people where I said, well, why are you doing this? Well, I want to reduce my my wealth tax debt. Yeah, but wealth tax until you get to about 2.5 million hasn't gone over 1%. But actually, you're paying about 2% or 2.5% to your bank for the mortgage. I don't understand the sense in that. I never have done. But you know, if you're a French resident, there really is no advantage to getting a mortgage for a property, because you're liable to succession tax on your worldwide assets.
And on the subject of mortgages still, Joe, have mortgage rates changed since COVID? I mean, is it harder to get one? I think last time we talked, you mentioned that obviously if you're a worker in the hospitality sector, you'd find it tough to get a loan at the moment, because obviously they're going to assess people's ability to pay. What's the situation?
Well, that at the moment hasn't changed really. The BNP were the ones that first told us that they were going to, it was going to be much harder to put a dossier in and get it approved if you were in an industry, for example, hospitality, airlines, events, that type of thing, where there's no guarantee that that's going to come back soon. However, if you are working full time and you have got a good job and it isn't going to be affected by this, then they are quite straightforward. And I think you need to put a 20% deposit down, but the interest rates are still really low. And we're still getting mortgages for like 1.1, 1.2% fixed for term, which is like a really, really good rate. And I think that's why the property market in France itself is so busy, because the interest rates are so low.
And if people are in a hurry to buy, as we're seeing they're going to be, are a lot of them thinking if they're cash buyers, it's going to speed the process, or does it, being a mortgage, does that not slow it down?
No, a cash buyer will definitely speed the process, because you're not, in a compromis de vente, which is the exchange of contracts. The mortgage is a suspensive clause, and you have like 45 days to get a yes or no from the bank. If you're a cash buyer, we're not waiting for that decision. We're not, and it might be a no, and you've got to apply to another bank, which could take longer. So yeah, as cash buyers, it is a lot quicker as a process in general.
Okay. Now here's a broad question which I'm going to ask both of you, from Leader Lima Boswell. What's the most important thing we need to learn when we decide to move to France?
Language.
Language?
The language would really help. That would be something that will help you integrate. It will help your life there. If you've got children, it will help your children. So I would definitely say the language is the most important thing to try to learn when you come to France, particularly if you're in rural communities. And a lot of Brits do tend to buy in rural communities, and the southwest of France, Brittany, those type of areas, where it's not like perhaps in the Côte d'Azur where they will all speak English. Well, they don't all speak English, but a lot of them will. In the rural countryside, none of them do. So I would say the language is really important to try to learn. But they're really helpful, even if you speak a little bit. It goes a long way.
Rob, anything to add to what have you learnt as a seasoned Francophile now?
I don't think it's the language, but maybe Joanna is correct. Maybe that's because it's the Riviera and the Côte d'Azur where I moved to and still live in. For me, I think the mistake that there's two big mistakes that people make before they arrive. One is they don't research what they're planning to do. They sort of, their heart takes over. They've been on holiday to France for a few years, and then they've seen it in the summer months, and they just want that all year round, and they go and the head is ruled by the heart. And I think that then we find people repent at their leisure, so to speak. So I would say research of what you want to do, what you're looking to achieve. And then also the next thing that then comes along is before they can't talk to their neighbour, actually they then start can have real problems with their finances, because the tax system and the finance system is completely different in France. So to evaluate that before you come, to see what you're walking into is, maybe it's my accountancy background that's coming out here, but I'd hate to find out 2 or 3 months down the line that actually I've just made a massive financial mistake. And actually to get out of it is going to cost me a lot of money. So I would say research and check out your finances. And at the same time, if you can learn French, even better.
Yeah, okay. And
I was also going to say the budget on renovation, because the properties are so cheap in a lot of areas. You can pick up a property in a village house for 40,000 euros, but you might need to spend 100 on it. And I think a lot of people do underestimate the cost of building. Just because the properties are cheap, it doesn't necessarily mean the building costs will be, and they'll probably be about the same per square metre as it is in the UK. But it doesn't necessarily mean the resale value is going to be the same, so you might not get that money back. So research and not taking on too much of a project unless you're planning on staying there forever is probably good advice as well, because you might not get it back in resale.
Yeah, that's a good point, because building costs have gone up. I certainly in the UK as well. A question now, healthcare is another thing that British people will have to get their head around. I know that there's, again, a certain amount of aspects that you don't quite know yet, but we've got a question from David Kelly, who's saying he's got a Polish girlfriend, so she's EU and he's British. There's going to be vast differences in healthcare entitlements between the two, won't there? What is the system at the moment as far as healthcare for him?
It depends. I mean, if he's working and he's paying tax, he'll be in the system the same as everybody else. And like myself, I'm already in the system. We get 70% cover, and you take top up insurance for 30%. Because we're already in France and we're living here before the 31st of December, that will just carry on as it is. But there are there's plenty of insurance suppliers that will offer good healthcare cover if you can't get it. It's like, for example, Americans and Australians. If you're not working and you're not paying tax into the system, then you would probably have to look at that as an option. Really don't know. It depends on the Brexit agreement, whether, because how many Europeans are living in England with the National Health Service. So there probably will be reciprocal agreements between different countries, but again, it's too early to say at the moment.
Sure.
I mean, I'll just add to that, Lisa, and insofar as, if you're arriving in France and you are entitled to a UK state pension, you can pick up what's known as an S1. And you submit the S1 to the CPA and the French Health Service. You end up with a carte vitale. You're in the French health system. And the UK and France has already confirmed that they will honour that post the Brexit day. Again, it is, as Joanna just said, it is more difficult to understand what Britain is going to do post Brexit for people who move then. But I would say that the situation is that, this is just a personal opinion. The UK are going to continue to pay, and they've said they will continue to pay. The triple lock's coming under a little bit of pressure at the moment, but they've said they will continue to pay UK pensions, state pensions, and upgrade them. And if that person was in the UK, they will be entitled to NHS benefits. So therefore, you would imagine that during the negotiations, they will arrive at a firm decision where they will continue to honour S1s. Now the biggest issue that we're seeing at the moment with quite a lot of people who are deciding to move before Brexit are those early retirees who haven't yet picked up their UK state pensions, because in the last few years, state pensions have moved back. You know, ladies are now the same as blokes. And if you're retiring in the next few years, you've probably got to wait till you're 67 to pick up your UK state pension, not 65 or earlier. Now, the difficulty is with those people, they will not have an S. They can't apply for an S1 because they can't get a state pension. So therefore, they're then going to find another way of either self-insuring with private means, or they can join what's known as the PUMA system. I won't get too deep into it, but you are able to join the French health system. And in very broad terms, you sort of pay between 6 and 8% of your taxable income. Now, you go back again to the gentleman who asked questions about tax before, and what you need to do is, that's one of the things you need to look at from a finance point of view, because actually it could be cheaper to rearrange your affairs to reduce your taxable income down, which would then make it more equitable to have into the PUMA system under that, rather than paying for private medical insurance. I know I've just outraged every salesman of private medical insurance in France at that point, but there is a state system that you can join, you know. And as Joanna said, that if you are working, you are covered, because if you are working now and you live in France, going back to the answer I gave you much earlier, and you are employed in the UK and paying UK national insurance, you're entitled to UK NHS cover. So I believe that will continue post-Brexit, and you will then continue to be part of the French health system, and your vital will carry on working.
I think that it's probably a subject worth a whole webinar in its own right, once we've got some clarity, maybe. Moving on to slightly easier ground, Joe. I've got a question from Fiona Bowie, who sounds like she's chomping at the bit to get looking at some properties with you. Apart from quarantine, is there, that's the UK 14-day thing, is there anything to stop us viewing in France now? Are guest houses open in France if they want to come and look?
Yeah, they certainly are. I mean, we run training courses every month, and the agents are coming from all over France to the course. So there's a lot of the chambre d'hôtes and guest houses open. However, the border's not open. So coming from the UK at the moment until the 29th of June is still going to be difficult. Once that opens, yes, everything is open back again in France. You know, and people are visiting and traveling around. We're seeing a lot of Parisians visiting properties in the countryside, a lot of Bordelais from Bordeaux. You know, there's a lot of different city people that are sort of looking now for second homes in the countryside, and they're traveling and obviously staying in bed and breakfast and things like that for the visits.
Okay, great. And I've got another question from Sarah Wesley about, she's interested in the south of France, but she's got £150,000 and she's interested in perhaps somewhere near Béziers. Now that's in the Languedoc, isn't it? I know that's not your patch, Rob. Joe, I know you've got agents down there because I've talked to them in the past. I mean, 150,000, you could get something, couldn't you?
Yeah, you definitely could. Yeah, I mean, we'd say around that sort of region, the average 3-bedroom good sized home is around 180,000. So that's 180,000 euros. So you're probably not far off what the average house price is there. And there are certainly some lovely village properties that you would get there. I wouldn't go too much lower than that, because otherwise you're going to be looking at doing quite a bit of work on the property. But certainly with £150,000, you would be able to get things in and around Béziers or the Languedoc. If you had a slightly more, 180 would be a lot better.
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful area. That it's very Catalan, and it's got some wonderful, very French beach resorts down there. And a question from Steve Wakely. Has the French government announced when the UK-France borders will be open for non-essential journeys? We've booked on a ferry on the 20th of June.
It's the 29th. Britons are stopping their quarantine. So we get more news on the 15th of June. So I think it's the 15th that we find out more information on which borders are open. I think Spain is not allowing Spanish till the 1st of July. Right. England, France, we're not sure. I think we probably find out on the 15th of June.
Okay.
I mean, there are people still managing to get across and come across, particularly we have seen people come across on the Eurotunnel. They have, but it might get a little bit tighter now that there's a quarantine in the UK. That was before the 8th of June. So quite a few people did come over just before that date and are still here. But after the 15th, we should know more. And if the quarantine is stopped on the 29th of June, it makes it a lot easier for going back to the UK without having to not be able to work or anything, you know, with 2 weeks quarantine. So the 15th, 29th will be the dates when we know. So the 20th, don't know.
Yeah, and I mean that's a great advantage of France, isn't it? That people can drive when they're allowed to. Have you had a spike of interest in the sort of northern tranche of France, because people are thinking that air travel is going to be a lot more complicated, expensive?
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, is going to be a big issue. And I think that will push France more than perhaps Spain, Italy and Portugal, because if this situation arises again or whatever, you can drive to France in a day, whereas you're reliant on flights a lot for other countries, you know, and you can get across from door to door. For me, if I go from New Haven to Dieppe and I'm sort of southwest France, it takes me 6 hours on driving and 3.5, 4 hours on the boat. So you can easily do it in a day. The further south you go, obviously the longer drive, but it still is doable. You know, it's not 24 hours or whatever. And if, you know, the flights come back to normal, it's only an hour flight. So again, it's very close and great weather.
Yeah, I'll make a lovely little road trip. A question here from Kate Leto. What will happen if we can't buy before the end of the year? Any idea what the implications of buying post-Brexit might be? I mean, I think she's just referring to maybe purchase taxes and what you know, if you're just buying a holiday property, it won't be any different, will it?
No, it'd be exactly the same as it is for every other nationality. Sorry, Rob, I'll let you carry on.
You're absolutely hitting the nail on the head.
Yeah, it will be the same, but there will be differences when you sell with capital gains tax, which will be higher, which Rob will probably know more about than me.
Yeah, what do you what is the difference between capital gains tax between EU and non-EU, Rob?
It all depends on where you are a resident, to be honest with you. I mean, France, if you're selling a French property will be liable to capital gains tax. And the difference between capital gains tax when it's your secondary property is just the same for French people as it is for anyone else, any other EU, EEA people, or non-EU. So that doesn't make a difference.
Right, okay. And just on the subject of, we touched on succession, you did, Rob. I mean, it works very differently in France, doesn't it? And you need to think about succession planning, but you also need to make a separate will for your French property. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say that you need to look at succession very differently if you're coming from the UK, because in the UK you can literally leave whatever you want to whoever you want, whereas in France, due to the Napoleonic laws, the government tells you what's going to happen. Now there are ways around that. But you need to understand it. I mean, going all the way back to going St. Joanna for a property, how you actually buy the property is quite crucial. You know, at that stage, you can enter into the compromis de vente, a clause which will actually have an impact if one of you dies, if you're buying it jointly, while you own the property. In the UK, people simply go and get married, register office wedding, you get married, you have a party, you go on your honeymoon and you're married. In France, you've got to fill in a dossier and you have to submit that to the mairie before you get married. And then, I mean, an interesting point is when my wife and I arrived here, we weren't married. We had our first child and then realized that with all the difficulties, we needed to be married. So it was very romantic. We got married for that reason. And the point I'm trying to make here is we submitted the dossier, we'd arranged for the wedding and everything. And a week before the wedding, the local mairie rang up and said, you can't get married. Sorry? You can't get married. Why? The dossier is not complete. Why is it not complete? Your birth certificate is wrong. No, it's the one that I was given 40 years ago when I was born. No, it's got to be dated within 6 months. So you have to make sure that you get the dossier right. And one of the things inside the dossier is to choose under which regime you are married. And then that can have an impact when you die. So if you're still in France when you die, or you own a French property when you die, actually where you are married can affect what happens to the asset. So it becomes a really complicated subject. And that's one of the things that we find, you know, people after the event, they simply go and buy a property and they buy it jointly like they would in the UK. And then one of them dies, and then they don't realise that they've got 3 children, and the 3 children are owning 75% of the deceased asset. That person then wants to sell the property and then use the proceeds to buy another property. There's a problem because they don't own all the property anymore.
Yeah.
So it really is quite a complicated subject.
Gosh, another webinar subject in its own right. This touches on an issue we skated over earlier, Joe. Given that Robert Harris says, given the tight time frame, could I buy a cheap property in order to qualify for the pre-deadline residency, and then take more time to buy the right longer-term property? Now, you suggested perhaps that's not ideal because of the buying and selling costs. What do you reckon?
I think that would be a bad idea. I think it would be better to rent somewhere, not have the notaire's costs and all the legal costs involved in buying the property, and just rent somewhere until you find the right property. You know, if you're going to be moving over anyway, then come and find a nice area that you want to live in, rent in that area while you make a search. But buying and selling, you're going to have the costs, you know, twice, and not just in removal costs, in trying to sell it. You know, all of those type of things as well. It would be a much easier process just to find somewhere to rent and then buy the house that you want. Yeah.
Okay. Maggie Parker asked, is the paperwork tricky if you're buying a holiday home rather than a permanent resident? I mean, the purchase process is the same, presumably. But I mean,
it's exactly the same. It doesn't make any difference at all. You know, you go through exactly the same process. You go through the compromis de vente stages exactly the same as you would. Obviously, you'd make an appointment with a notaire or a financial advisor beforehand to talk about how you want to buy the property. As Rob was just explaining, you can't do that after you've signed for the property. You have to do it before you buy the property. Usually, if it's just a straightforward sale, we would take the couple in to see the notaire an hour before the signing. They can discuss how they want to leave the property, if they want certain children or whatever, or whether they have to put a clause in the contract or make a pact or something like that, usually before the contract is signed, and then the contract signed in exactly the same way, whether it was a holiday home or a permanent home. It's the same process.
Sure. And what are the what do you say to people for purchase costs for property? What's the sort of obviously it depends on how much the property is worth generally.
Well, we would say that you'd obviously have if you're buying through an agent, you're going to have agency fees. So they're always shown in the value of the property that's being advertised. So it will show the price inclusive of the agency fees, and usually it will now show what that agency fee is as well. Then on the price of the house, so you take off the agency fee, whatever the value of the house is, you're just going to have the notary fees. And that will be tax foncière and tax habitation, and obviously the stamp duty, etc., that notaire collects. That can be anything from as little as 6 to maybe 8%, depending on whether you've got mortgages and things like that, or how much work they're doing. Most of that is government taxes, so it goes back to the government. On the day of completion, you would usually be asked for the tax habitation, whoever's in the house on the 1st of January pays it for the whole year, but the tax foncière is pro rata. So if you bought it in October, you would be subject for the last 3 months of the year to pay that. Sometimes the notaire might ask you for that payment on the signing date, or you might get invoiced for that later. But that's really all you have to pay. So I would say, you know, the price that it's advertised at, and then sort of between 6 and 8% on top for the notary fees.
And Edward Ford would like you just to clarify one of your timelines when you said, how long does it take to buy a place? Is it 12 weeks sometimes?
The shortest sale I've ever done was 6 weeks, but that was hard work, you know, with French paperwork. And also you've got things like the SAFER, where if you've got a certain amount of land, it has to go to them first. That can usually take a month or 2 months to come back. But you can fast track things like that. You can pay a fee and it will be back within a month. But yeah, usually I would say, you know, 3 months is good. If there's any, we've got to get diagnostics on the properties done. There's got to be a FOSS report, which, you know, for the septic tank. There's got to be quite a lot of pre-sale stuff that needs to be done. We try to encourage vendors to get that done, you know, at the time when they put the listing on with us, so that if we do find a buyer, they're ready to go. We're not waiting for all of these documentations and sort of, you know, planning permissions and everything else to come through. But usually, on a good sale, it would take between sort of 3 and 4 months to complete.
Great.
On a bad
And
sale,
we're getting an awful lot of questions, Rob, from people who, one of them is French and one of them is British, but they're based over here currently. Again, I know you don't know everything yet, but I mean, is that going to be easier for them to move as a couple to get their residency?
How long is a piece of string? Thank you. That was a real crunchy question. I don't think I can string this one out for 4 minutes. Look, I think that for me, I don't think France is going to put the barriers up. So I don't think there's going to be any issues in arriving. They're open for business. I mean, that was one of the first things that President Macron said when everyone knew that Brexit was definitely going to happen. So I don't really subscribe to this, you know, you're not going to be able to arrive. You are going to have to jump through some more hoops. But, you know, if you were thinking, you know, if you're an American and you're arriving and you go and get a visa, as I said before, and then you made an application for a carte de séjour, and if actually you have been married to a French person, that application is treated in much more preferential, receives much more preferential treatment than, let's say, if it was 2 Americans trying to arrive. So I think that will be the same for Brits. And if you think about it, Liz, what the French are doing is saying around about the 1st to the 4th of July, there's going to be a dedicated website to produce a special residency card for British nationals. Now that to me says that there could be EEA, EU and Brits and then others. Now I'm not saying that's what will happen, but France is mindful of how much money British people have brought to France, bring to France, and how many, you know, Brits buy property. There's lots of French who carry on renting. We buy property. We probably, excuse me saying this, but we probably invaded better in the last 40 years by buying property in France than we've ever done before, going back centuries. So I really don't subscribe to this, it being a big problem.
Right.
I also think, Liz, we are actually the highest of all international buyers in France. The British is 27% of the market, followed by the Belgians, which is 19%. So I can't see that they're going to want to stop the biggest buyers of from the international market in France, where we are actually the highest.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure you're right, Joe. And we're running out of time for questions now. We've been snowed under, and lots of the questions are very similar. I think we're going to try and answer as many of the questions in writing and put them up on our website for anyone who's wants to sort of follow up with some of the complex things we've been addressing. We're also going to have another French seminar in early July, and this when some clarity is gained, as Rob explained, on the French government website, we can hopefully explain a bit more about that. But in the meantime, we've got some property hunting resources on aplaceinthesun.com, buying guides to areas of France, lots of lovely properties like the one displayed behind Joe's head from Leggett and a lot of other agents. We've got mortgage advisors, we've got people like professionals like Blevins Frank. So do have a look around the website for more resources, and keep an eye on our webinar schedule, and we'll be putting up the if you want to listen again or you've missed it, you can listen to the link. You can tap into it on our website shortly. So thank you very much, Rob and Joe. That's been really useful. Lots of big questions in the next couple of weeks, and thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.